seems to be a war on gender at the minute, what's being taught in schools. I don't even know where to begin with it. Just absolute chaos on what is being fed to our children, what is being allowed. Yeah. Does anything come up for you around that?
It's a very disheartening thing to see, right? And I get the extremity that it comes from. I get why people feel like it's a justified thing, and it's there's so much nuance in it because there's psychological health at play, there's mental health, there's emotional health, there's trauma, and because we don't always have the data to back up what's happening in real time, it's like, do we want to wait 50 years to find out if it's good or not? But I think the beginning thing that I don't think most people see, that it's an extension of kind of removing the woman from family. It's like, to remove masculinity is to actually remove the woman. Like, the woman is the center point for the nurturing and the health of the family, where the masculine is like the support and the structure. It's like the health of the woman is it's like one hand washes the other. But when you remove the need for the masculinity or masculine presence, whether the person is there or not, you increase the woman's need to have that masculine edge herself, which decreases her ability to use that feminine energy to just be present in all things. So you have women who are less present. You do that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The next generation is going to be more removed from family than the one before it. And so now, and it's happening a lot with the young kids, there are stats that show with every generation, the amount of people who identify as LGBTQ doubles, which is very alarming to a degree. An uptick maybe, but like every generation is like a double. It's like from 2% to 5% to 10% to Gen Z. There are some stats that say up to 40% identify as some kind of LGBTQ identifier. And it's like, well, how are these kids getting access to these things at a younger age? Because if it was 50% 100 years ago and still 50% now, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is just like a natural occurrence in humans. But for it to be increasing at a exponential rate means there's some kind of cultural influence at play. And we know that the youth are more influenced than someone else who has already lived life. So they're being exposed to new ideas, new things that maybe sound good in theory. Maybe the person telling them is a good actor, but not really conscious of like, is this information that should be shared? Like, I wouldn't go to a kindergarten class and teach calculus. It's not appropriate. Not that it's wrong, it's inappropriate to teach a 5-year-old calculus unless they're a math whiz, which it's an anomaly. So we can say that in most cases, 99% of the time, it would be inappropriate to teach calculus. If we can recognize that a math subject that has no moral standpoint, no cultural standpoint, it's just math, can be inappropriate for a 5-year-old, how can we not assess that something as polarizing as gender identity, sexuality can be inappropriate for a 5-year-old, for a 6-year-old, for a 7-year-old, for a 3-year-old? And like I said, it comes from you separate man and woman, and you have the child by themselves. And there's a strong, not only observation, but just the gut feeling of that's next. Like, the child is now separated. They can do whatever they want with the children because no one who's going to protect them. The mother who's working 80 hours a week, the father who's not present or who's not masculine, who's like, okay, this is what they, like, no one is kind of on guard because that's what family is for, is to safeguard and protect the children. to prepare them for what's happening. So we're almost putting untrained soldiers to battle. They're battling things that conversations that adults are having, political debates on, psychologists are having debates on, and you're exposing these things to a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and we don't see the why that's not appropriate. And I think people, and this is where I think the more extreme you go, the further you get, the closer you get to like the darker forces. Because I believe it is intentional. I believe they do recognize that this is not appropriate and that a child is basically defenseless against this rhetoric. There's no other way for a child. There's nothing there programming to say, hey, this may not be appropriate for me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't, adults can do what they want to do, right? You get to adulthood and you feel like you want to live a certain way, by all means, I believe you have the sovereignty to do that. But I don't believe anyone has the sovereignty to push a agenda onto children who are defenseless mentally and psychologically. And we don't know the effects it's going to have on them 15 years from now. Like, what are the families 30 years from now going to look like? We don't have no idea if they're going to be healthy or not, because we're already fighting an uphill battle with the children who are coming into age now. So like, it's a tough fight. And that's why I'm saying that we need women championing this. We need men championing this, because like really looking at what's at stake. Yeah, sure. Maybe no one in this generation thinks that things are going to go up in smoke, but it's like, what about the people who are being born now? What kind of world are they going to live in 20 years? And who's going to be influencing those things? If they're targeting the 10-year-olds now, well, in 20 years, the 10-year-olds are going to be 30. And they're going to start coming into their own influence. And so what are they going to start enforcing? And what's it going to mean for the kids that are being born today? So they're already into the generations. They're doing the training that used to happen for boys and girls. They're doing it in the opposite, and then claiming that the gender roles are outdated or oppressive in nature. But it's like, hey, you're doing the same thing. You're programming these children with an idea that at least we can say the masculine feminine dynamic has been proven through evolution, that this dynamic works just from an evolutionary standpoint. We cannot prove that anything else works.
Yeah.
So at best, it's a experiment. At worst, it's sabotage and destruction. So it's like, which one is it? Either you're experimenting on my kids, or you're self-destroying, or you're trying to destroy my kids. There's no really gray area in here, because you can say it's an experiment and you can be a good faith experimenter, but it's like, hey, I didn't approve to experiment on my child, so I'm going to opt out.
Yeah.
If you can be integral and honest enough to say this is an experiment, let the people who want to experiment with their children, which I still don't think they should, but that's their children. They have the right to do what they want to do with their children. If they say, hey, I agree with this experiment, see how this goes, they have willingly signed up to be a part of this experiment. If people haven't agreed to that, then let them opt out of the experiment. Otherwise, you're intentionally trying to destroy them because you're not allowing them a choice. And I think it's going to be an uphill political battle. I think we're seeing a lot of things that are being challenged, but I don't think it's a political battle. I don't think it's something to be won with a vote or with a caucus. It's a very conscious, spiritual, I wouldn't say battle. It's a movement of energy, because there's no war. No one has to be defeated in this. It's just energy has to move back to center. And when it's back at center, everyone can still, hey, if you want to live this way, that's your right to live that way. But the same way you want autonomy, families do too. Yeah. They want their children to have autonomy in having a choice what they grow up into be. So let's give them a basic education so they can learn how to be competent men and women, right? Raise competent children, be competent parents. Let's give them that. And if they want to, go left, go right, go up, go down, go sideways, when they become adults, that's then their choice. But I think we're far from that, but I think we're the more extreme things get, it's like rubber band. It has to pop back into place at some point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm fearful of like how extreme it can get. I've seen some things that have been already kind of like highlighted about the childism,
Mm.
where the new fighters like to fight for child's autonomy and what that means for child consent with different things. It's how extreme are we going to go before
Yeah.
someone says, you know what, this is enough. We're not behind this anymore.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, that's how history goes, whether it's, slavery or the Holocaust, or like there's always an extreme event that says, okay, that's too much. All right, too far, reel it in. And so I think we're just in one of those extreme time periods where it's going to cause us to shift spiritually and consciously, say, you know what, let's change how we're doing this. Let's
Mm.
shift.